For years, Joanne Woodward stayed quiet while everyone loved her marriage to Paul Newman. He was the movie star that every woman wanted to date. She was the one who got to keep him. Their love story seemed perfect, almost magical. But now at 95 years old, Joanne isn't staying quiet anymore. She's finally telling the truth about what it was really like being married to Newman. And what she says breaks apart the fairy tale everyone thought they knew. Before everyone knew her as Paul Newman's wife, Joanne Woodward was just a girl from the South who had big dreams. She was born on February 27, 1930, in a small town called Thomasville, Georgia. Her full name was Joanne Guignot Trimier Woodward. Those fancy middle names came from her family's old history and showed she was meant to be special. Her mom loved movies so much that she named Joanne after a famous movie star named Joan Crawford. This put big dreams right into her daughter's name from the start. Joanne grew up with one brother named Wade Jr. Her family moved around a lot when she was little. They lived in different towns in Georgia before finally staying in a place called Marietta. There, Joanne went to Marietta High School where she first got on stage. She never forgot where she came from either. Even after she became famous, she still supported her old high school and the local theater. But her love for movies didn't start at school. It began on one amazing night in Atlanta when she was just 9 years old. Little Joanne went to the big fancy opening of the movie Gone with the Wind. She was so excited by all the bright lights and movie stars that she ran right into the crowd of actors. Without thinking twice, she sat right down on the lap of a famous actor named Laurence Olivier. He was dating Vivien Leigh, the main actress in the movie. Most kids would have been pulled away by security guards, but Joanne made herself impossible to forget. Many years later, when she worked with Olivier in a 1977 TV show called Come Back, "Little Sheba," she reminded him about that night. He looked at her and said yes. He remembered the brave little girl who jumped onto his lap. When Joanne was a teenager, her parents got divorced. This meant another move, this time to Greenville, South Carolina. At Greenville High School, she didn't just graduate with good grades. She also got experience acting in the little theater, proving she wasn't just a dreamer. She was a real performer. Her love for acting took her to Louisiana State University, where she studied drama and joined a sorority called Chi Omega. She worked hard to get better at acting before setting her sights on the biggest stage she could think of: New York City. Once she got to New York, Joanne didn't waste any time. She went straight to the best acting schools, studying at the Actors Studio and training under a famous teacher named Sanford Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse. She wasn't just learning how to say lines, she was learning how to become an actress who would one day make her own mark in Hollywood. She wasn't Paul Newman's wife yet. She wasn't the Oscar winner or the perfect half of America's favorite couple. She was just Joanne, the Southern girl who once crashed a movie opening, chased her dreams, and refused to be ordinary. But ordinary was never going to happen for her. The restless fire that carried her from Greenville to college to New York City was just getting started. The girl who once watched stars from the outside was now stepping into their world, determined to make her own space and steal both the stage and the movie screen. By the early 1950s, Joanne Woodward was no longer the little girl sneaking into movie openings. She was fighting her way into the movie business for real. In 1952, she got her very first TV job on a show called Robert Montgomery Presents, in an episode called Penny. It wasn't fancy or headline-making, but it was a start. Soon, she was working non-stop, going to auditions until she got a job as a backup actress for a Broadway play called Picnic in 1953 and 1954. And this is where fate stepped in. Backstage, she met Paul Newman. At that time, he was still married to his first wife, Jacqueline Witt. But the connection between him and Joanne was impossible to ignore. The man who would become her great love entered her life right there behind the curtain of a Broadway show. Television became Joanne's practice ground. She was everywhere, showing up in shows like Tales of Tomorrow, Goodyear Playhouse, Danger, the Philco Television Playhouse, the Ford Television Theater, and Omnibus. She wasn't a star yet, but she was building her path, showing up again and again until Hollywood couldn't ignore her anymore. Her First big movie came in 1955 with Count Three and Prey, a Western that took place after the Civil War, where she played a tough orphan girl. This role put her on the map, and Fox Movie Studios signed her to a long contract. By 1956, she was the main star in A Kiss Before Dying, acting opposite Robert Wagner as a rich heiress in a thriller that showed just how magnetic she could be on film. She even went back to Broadway with The Lovers. And while that show didn't last long, Joanne's hunger for both stage and screen never went away. But then 1957 came, and everything changed. Joanne Woodward amazed the world in The Three Faces of Eve. She played a woman with three different personalities: a housewife, a wild rebel, and a balanced young woman. She gave such a complex performance that critics couldn't believe they were watching the same actress in one movie. The Academy Awards couldn't believe it either. Joanne won the Oscar for Best Actress while wearing a dress she had sewn together herself. No fancy designer gown, no Hollywood styling, just Joanne, raw talent, and a needle and thread. It was the kind of underdog moment that made her part of history forever. From there, she became Fox's leading lady. Movies like No Down Payment and The Sound and the Fury with Yul Brynner made her a real star. Director Sidney Lumet put her alongside Marlon Brando and Anna Magnani in The Fugitive Kind. The movie didn't make a lot of money, but Joanne's team-ups with Paul Newman were stealing the spotlight. Together, they starred in From the Terrace, which she later said she loved, mostly because she thought she looked like movie star Lana Turner, and then Paris Blues, proving their chemistry was as strong on screen as it was in real life. In 1963, Joanne took a bold step into the world of burlesque dancing for the movie The Stripper, working closely with the famous gypsy Rose Lee to learn the right moves. By the mid-1960s, she was holding her own against big stars like Sean Connery in A Fine Madness and captivating audiences in A Big Hand for the Little Lady. But it was Rachel, produced and directed by Newman, that gave her one of her most heartfelt performances, playing a lonely schoolteacher looking for love. The role got her another Oscar nomination, proving she was more than just Mrs. Newman. By the late 1970s, Joanne's career stretched across every type of entertainment. She starred with Burt Reynolds in The End, appeared in the Emmy-winning See How She Runs, and worked again with Laurence Olivier in Come Back, Little Sheba, reminding him once more of that night she had jumped into his lap as a child. In 1979, she directed an episode of the TV show Family, proving she wasn't just an actress. She had the skills to run the whole show, too. The 1980s kept her busy. She appeared in The Shadow Box, Crisis at Central High, returned to Broadway in Candida in 1981 and 1982, and starred alongside Newman again in Harry and Son. On TV, she shined in Do You Remember Love in 1985, which got her another Emmy. And when she wasn't acting, she was writing and directing, adapting Shirley Jackson's Come Along With Me in 1982, and taking on Tennessee Williams in The Glass Menagerie. Joanne wasn't just collecting roles. She was collecting awards, multiple Emmys, an Oscar, and even recognition as a producer for Broadway's Dreamers, the legacy of the group theater. She managed to prove decade after decade that she wasn't defined by her husband, her marriage, or even the Hollywood machine. She carved out her own name. From television to stage to film, Joanne Woodward built a career on daring choices, raw performances, and a realness that made her stand out in a sea of Hollywood fake glamour. She wasn't chasing sparkle and glitz. She was chasing the work, and in doing so, she made herself unforgettable. But Joanne's story was never just about the work. It was also about the man who stood beside her for 50 years, through the good times and the heartbreaks. Because as much as she built her own success, she also helped build one of the greatest love stories Hollywood has ever known. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward's love story wasn't just another Hollywood romance. It became the gold standard for what a lasting marriage in show business could look like. They were married for half a century, from 1958 until Newman's death in 2008. And through those decades, They built a life that mixed passion, family, heartbreak, and giving back to others. The connection started quietly. They first met during the Broadway play Picnic, where Newman was still married to Jackie Witt. Joanne wasn't instantly love-struck. Years later, she described how she hadn't been blown away by his looks at first, though she eventually compared him to an ice cream soda on a hot summer day, something so perfect it was impossible to resist. It wasn't until they worked together, again on the movie set of The Long Hot Summer in 1957, that friendship turned into something undeniable. Soon after Newman's first marriage ended, he and Joanne stepped into a new life together. They got married in Las Vegas on January 29, 1958, and Joanne instantly became stepmother to Newman's 3 children, Scott, Susan, and Stephanie, from his first marriage. Together, she and Newman added 3 more daughters to the family: Eleanor Nell, Melissa, and Claire Clea. Their family life happened in Westport, Connecticut, far away from the craziness of Hollywood. Nell, their first baby together, was born in April 1959. The same year, Newman got a big role in The Young Philadelphians. Nell would later try acting using the name Nell Potts before eventually starting Newman's own organics in 1993. In 1961, the couple welcomed Melissa, who was born on the exact same day their movie Paris Blues opened in the U.S. A perfect twist for a family who lived and breathed movies. Melissa also briefly tried acting like her parents. Then came Claire Clea in 1965, the youngest, who grew up loving horses, and later became a nationally ranked horse rider before dedicating herself to her father's charity work. As their family grew, so did their professional partnership. In 1963, they left their mark, literally, at Grauman's Chinese Theater, pressing their hands and feet into cement and signing his and hers beside their prints. Joanne had already made history as one of the original people honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1958, years before Newman got his star in 1994. Their marriage wasn't just built on fame or good looks, it had humor at its heart. Joanne once explained that while Newman was definitely attractive, what mattered most was his ability to make her laugh, and that was what kept them together. Newman himself put it in simple terms when asked about staying faithful, saying that he had steak at home, so there was no reason to go out for a hamburger. Their careers often mixed together. Rachel in 1968 was one of their greatest team efforts. Joanne starred while Newman directed. That year, both husband and wife got Academy Award nominations, one of the rare times a couple had been recognized together like that. Their daughter Nell even appeared in the movie, playing a younger version of her mother's character. Joanne's performance in The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds in 1972, directed by Newman and featuring Nell again, brought her a Golden Globe nomination and the Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival. But their story also carried tragedy. In 1978, Newman's oldest son, Scott, died at just 28 from accidentally taking too many drugs and drinking too much alcohol. Newman later admitted that he had convinced himself Scott's behavior was just young person foolishness, and said he had dropped to his knees more than once to beg his son's forgiveness. In Scott's honor, Newman started the Scott Newman Center, dedicated to teaching people about drug abuse. The loss hit the family hard, but Newman and Joanne threw themselves even more into helping others. In 1988, they started the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in Ashford, Connecticut, a place where children with serious illnesses could have fun and make friends at no cost. It became one of Newman's greatest passions, with celebrities coming together to support the cause. Newman once explained that acting hadn't taken away his duty as a citizen. He still had a responsibility to give back. Even as their movie work slowed down, their presence together never faded. Their final on-screen team-up came in 2005 with the HBO miniseries Empire Falls. Both were nominated for Emmy, Golden Globe, and SAG Awards, and Newman won in all categories. It was a perfect final act for a couple who had spent decades making each other's work better. Behind closed doors, their love stayed strong. In 2008, they quietly celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone few Hollywood couples ever reach. Joanne once thought about how beauty fades and doesn't last forever, but having a partner who could make her laugh every single day was the greatest gift. That same year, Paul Newman lost his battle with lung cancer. He died on September 26, 2008, at his farmhouse in Westport, surrounded by family and friends. He was 83. For 50 years, Newman and Woodward beat the Hollywood odds. Their marriage was built on humor, loyalty, and an unshakable partnership. They were lovers, work partners, and people who helped others. Above all, they were proof that even in a world built on make-believe, a real love story could last. Joanne Woodward turned 95 in February. She's one of the last great stars from Hollywood's golden age. She spent her birthday far from cameras, quietly tucked away in Connecticut. Once the industry's darling and Oscar winner and Paul Newman's wife, the woman who seemed to have everything, Joanne has been out of the spotlight for over 10 years. Her last movie role was in Philadelphia in 1993. Her last TV appearance was in 2005 when she acted alongside Paul in Empire Falls, and her last time anyone saw her in public was 2013. Since then, silence. After Paul's death in 2008, Joanne stepped back completely. The couple's fancy Manhattan penthouse, the one that hosted endless parties with celebrity friends, went up for sale in December 2024 for nearly $10 million. The glamour is gone. Today, Joanne lives in the family's old 19th-century home in Westport, Connecticut. The house she and Paul bought to raise their daughters away from the craziness of California. It's where they built a real life. It's also where Paul died and where Joanne now spends her final chapter. But behind this quiet hiding lies the weight of a heartbreaking truth. In 2007, just days before Paul learned he had cancer that would kill him, Joanne was told she had Alzheimer's disease at 77. She disappeared from public life almost overnight. Her daughters became her anchors. Westport became her safe place. And the Hollywood star everyone thought had everything slowly faded from view. When Ethan Hawke worked on The Last Movie Stars, a 6-part documentary about Joanne and Paul, he revealed why the family wanted it made urgently. The point was to release it while Joanne was still alive, while she could still glimpse it even 15 years into Alzheimer's. The documentary wasn't just about Paul and Joanne's legend. It was about giving her something back before time took it all away. From the outside, Joanne Woodward's story looks like a dream. Fame, awards, beauty, and the love of one of Hollywood's most wanted men. But behind the sparkle, her life has been marked by heartbreak, loss, and battles most fans never knew about. And that's where the perfect picture cracks. For decades, Joanne Woodward kept her mouth shut. While the world worshipped at the altar of her marriage to Paul Newman, Hollywood's blue-eyed god, she sat quietly, smiling, gracious, and unshakable. Theirs was branded the love story of the century, a golden couple immune to scandal, heartbreak, or breaking apart. But now, at 95, Joanne isn't playing along with the fairy tale anymore. What has begun to leak out from those closest to her, and from Paul himself through his book written after he died, is a picture of a marriage far messier than the legend allowed. And it's a story that proves even Hollywood royalty couldn't escape the sting of betrayal, temptation, grief, and regret. When Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman first locked eyes in 1953, both were working as backup actors on the Broadway play Picnic. Paul was already married, tied down with 3 children. But his attraction to Joanne was instant and mutual. The connection was magnetic, so strong it started an affair that would break up his first marriage, and years later set the foundation for a union praised as one of Hollywood's most lasting. By 1958, Newman had divorced his first wife, Jackie Witt, and married Joanne in Las Vegas. They would go on to spend 5 decades together, raise 3 daughters, make 16 films as a pair, and weather storms the public rarely glimpsed. To the outside world they were untouchable, devoted, passionate, and perfectly balanced. But inside the family home, the reality was never that simple. Their daughter, Melissa, once described the marriage as complicated, pointing out that people clung to a fairy tale version of her parents that simply wasn't real. Life at home wasn't all sweetness and light. There were long stretches of tension, arguments that simmered and flared, and moments where the marriage itself almost fell apart. What held them together, Melissa admitted, was their refusal to quit. Even in their darkest hours, the complications ran deeper than career pressures or clashing personalities. Paul Newman, for all his charm and charisma, carried heavy shadows. He was haunted by the death of his only son, Scott, who died at just 28 from an overdose of drugs and alcohol in 1978. That loss never left him, and guilt became a quiet, eating-away presence in his life. Then there was the drinking. Those closest to the couple remembered Paul's love for beer and whiskey, which often spiraled into full-blown drinking binges. Joanne, who bore the weight of late nights and drunken absences, once drew a firm line in the sand. She made it clear she wouldn't put up with a husband who staggered home from supposed work too wasted to function. Either he pulled himself together, or she would walk away. Paul understood she wasn't bluffing. The pressures of Hollywood only made things more complicated. Both Newman and Woodward were stars in their own right, constantly balancing the demands of fame with their private lives. But while Joanne often stepped back to put their children and stability first, Paul wrestled with the duality of being a family man and an adored symbol pursued relentlessly by women who wanted to be the one to snag Hollywood's most desired man. Paul himself was brutally honest in his memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man. In it, he didn't gloss over his flaws, nor did he protect his reputation. He admitted that Joanne had awakened a side of him that shocked even him. He described the early years of their marriage as drenched in passion. With a makeshift love nest Joanne had built in their Beverly Hills home, a room she called the Effian Hut, furnished with a thrift shop double bed where they regularly indulged in wild intimacy, even while his kids were just down the hall. "We left a trail of lust all over the place," Paul remembered in one of the most candid confessions to ever surface from a Hollywood star. That lust, however, wasn't always confined to Joanne. Enter Nancy Bacon, a cocktail waitress turned Hollywood socialite known in town by the nickname Bacon and Legs. Petite, seductive, and impossibly charming, she caught Newman's eye during the height of his career. Their alleged affair lasted for nearly 2 years, a secret that, according to Bacon herself, was hardly a secret at all. In Hollywood, everyone knew. Friends, directors, insiders, they covered for him. While Paul was telling Joanne he was working late, he was, according to Bacon, slipping into her home and spending night after night in her bed. For her, it was intoxicating. For him, it was a cocktail of guilt, desire, and alcohol. Newman was already battling his drinking problem during this period, often drowning his conscience in beer and whiskey. Bacon later claimed she always knew the affair would end, not because their passion ran out, but because his guilt eventually would win. Rumors swirled in Hollywood, and while Newman snapped at journalists who dared to probe, the rumors of the cheating found their way back to Joanne. For her, the betrayal cut deep. At one point, she reportedly considered walking away entirely, tired of the late nights, the drinking, and now the cheating. Yet somehow, against all odds, she stayed. That decision to stay defined Joanne Woodward's life. She admitted later that being Mrs. Paul Newman was not easy. It came with constant battles, both public and private, good days and bad, sometimes in equal measure. But she also admitted that the good outweighed the bad. Their daughters echoed the same feeling. Their parents' marriage was messy, complicated, and sometimes explosive. But it endured. They didn't walk away. They fought, and they fought hard. Paul, for his part, never stopped saying how devoted he was to Joanne, even when women threw themselves at him. Even when his symbol status meant endless temptation, he reminded the world he already had what he wanted at home. His famous line summed it up. "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" Yet behind closed doors, Joanne bore the scars of being that steak, of being the anchor for a man who sometimes drifted, sometimes drowned. To the end of his life, Paul seemed captivated by Joanne. Friends described how his face lit up the moment she walked into a room, and how her presence had the power to shift his mood entirely. They fought, yes, But they also loved each other with an intensity that neither could copy elsewhere. And Joanne, though not praised as a symbol like her husband, adapted to the role of symbol's wife. She often brushed off the frenzy of attention Paul received, insisting she didn't feel threatened. But those closest to her knew that the cracks were real. She had built a fortress of grace and composure, but behind it lay the weariness of someone who had endured much more than the world ever knew. Now at 95, living quietly in Westport, Connecticut, Joanne has no need to play the part anymore. The Manhattan penthouse she and Paul once used as their celebrity playground has been sold. Her last public appearance was more than a decade ago. Alzheimer's has dimmed the sharp wit and brilliance that once made her a force in Hollywood. But through family, through Paul's memoir, and through documentaries like Ethan Hawke's The Last Movie Stars, Joanne's truth is finally being revealed. The fairy tale is over, replaced by something more human, more painful, but also more powerful. Her daughters describe a mother who was always the rock, even when she nearly reached her breaking point. A wife who set boundaries, demanded respect, and refused to be swallowed by her husband's demons. A woman who chose to stay not because the marriage was flawless, but because she was willing to fight for it, even when it nearly broke her. Paul, in his own words, admitted his flaws, his betrayals, and his weaknesses. Yet he also admitted his awe of Joanne, the woman who not only made him a husband but, in his words, gave birth to a creature. The myth of their perfect marriage may have shattered, but what emerges in its place is something raw, truer. A story of survival, endurance, heartbreak, and yes, love. As Joanne reaches 95, her legacy is no longer tied solely to Paul's. She is more than the woman who stood beside Hollywood's golden boy. She is a survivor of love's brutal contradictions, a woman who endured an affair, a husband's drinking, the unbearable loss of a stepson, and the exhaustion of carrying a complicated marriage on her shoulders. The tragedy of Joanne Woodward's life is that the world never saw her in full while Paul was alive. She was the quiet half of a myth, the one who absorbed the blows so the fairy tale could shine. But now, as the truth unfolds, her silence speaks louder than any script ever could. At 95, Joanne Woodward is no longer the flawless wife in a golden marriage. She is something far more remarkable, the woman who lived it all, endured it all, and finally let the truth slip through the cracks. What are your thoughts on Woodward and Newman's relationship? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen.